So this actually happened about 2 hours ago. I, a 26-year-old female, and my boyfriend, who's a 36-year-old male, decided to go out to the store to get oil. We have to go out 45 minutes just to get this in a bad part of the city, but it's the only European store that has the actual stuff that I grew up with eating. My family and I are from the Ukraine but live in the US, and it's really difficult finding authentic places that have exactly what we had, and this is the only place I found that has it down to the exact brand. As we're driving, we're on a 3-lane road, which we need to get into one of those midsection U-turn type of lanes. We get into our left turn lane and a black car goes by from the far right lane through the middle lane to cut us off at the left lane, which my boyfriend and I are just like, "What the hell?" And then they stop at a green light for the U-turn. My boyfriend gently honks twice in a nice way in case they were on their phone to go, since it's our turn. They go forward and we go to the parking lot directly on our ride to the store that we need to go to. The car in front of us, which was now on the far left lane, goes through another 2 lanes and drives into the sidewalk to go into the parking lot where we were going to, and it rides nearly on our bumper, pressing the horn the entire time we drove. My boyfriend eventually decided to stop a few feet further than the store instead of parking at it, and at that point I realized that his dash cam and backup camera was off. I tap it since it usually starts recording when it feels motion. It didn't turn on, and we realized that it somehow disconnected to his car. As he's trying to get the cameras plugged back into his car, the black car then pulls up, and I see 3 guys in there. They look to be between the ages of 18 to 20. They roll their window down, and the driver then reaches for something, about to take it out, and I'm now just screaming at my boyfriend. "Just drive! Go! Just go!" My boyfriend suddenly began doing donuts in the parking lot to get their car to back off while I'm now just screaming, "Oh God! The police! Call the police! I need to call the police!" And I managed to dial 911 as he was doing his last donut, and then suddenly began driving out of the parking lot. The black car was still chasing us out as I then finally got an answer, and when the police asked where we were, I blanked out and stuttered in a panic that we were currently being chased, and my boyfriend yelled out what road we were passing. He used to do Uber for 7 years, and he pretty much knows every street name by heart. The guys kept coming after us until we were about 3 to 4 blocks away from the police station, and we just stayed on the line. They probably realized where we were going, because they then swerved to a random road on our left. At some point we got disconnected, but the officer called me right back and stayed with us as we pulled into the station. We explained what happened, and the officer was nice. He offered to escort us back to the store following our car just in case the guys were still there. We decided to cut our day short, thanked the officer, and then went home. My boyfriend said he was amazed at how quickly I made all the right decisions, and he was surprised I even called the police because he's aware I have a history of being sexually assaulted by 2 on-duty officers 4 years ago, and how I've been terrified to call or speak to officers ever since. But I was so terrified of getting shot, and I didn't want something awful to happen to my boyfriend. I was so terrified that my chest hurt, and I'm so happy that we're now safe. That was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. I'm a 16-year-old male, and about a year ago in December of 2023, my female friend Izzy and I would constantly sneak out together. She's also 16, by the way. I suppose it was a way to escape from our shitty lives. 2 years prior, I came home from school, and I found my dad laying dead on the floor from a heart attack, and it left me pretty messed up mentally. Izzy, on the other hand, had lost her mom about a year or so later in a similar way, with us both performing CPR. This kind of trauma bonded us together in a way, and we became inseparable. We were each other's shadows that did everything together. Izzy had a rough relationship with her dad at the time, and would stay at my house for days on end, meaning we would constantly sneak out together, steal my mom's car, and just cause mischief. The story happened on a Saturday night. It was just past 1 a.m. and we were both pretty drunk, and with nothing to do, we decided to go sneak out like usual. Now, my dad bought me this electric bike with a seat on the back, sort of like a little moped in a way, which allowed us to go pretty far together and search for things to do. We got on the bike and decided to head to town, just a short 10-minute ride away. Now, I could tell I was pretty drunk, and so I didn't want to ride on the road in case something happened, so I decided to go through the forest. Now, for a little context, I lived in a small village just outside of the main town, and around us was a ton of woodland and footpaths to use, all leading their own way. Thankfully, although wobbly and falling off twice, we made it to the town at around 1:40 a.m. This was around the time where all of the bars and nightclubs had closed, meaning there was a huge amount of people staggering around looking to get food and taxis. Being 16 at the time, we were never able to actually get into any of the bars, and so sneaking out on a Saturday would become a regular occurrence for us, as we would just sit with random strangers and talk to them. Boring, I know, but at the time it was thrilling. After about 2 hours of sitting around talking to people, we decided it was time to head back. Now, keep in mind it was now way past 3 a.m., meaning the roads were deserted. There was absolutely nobody left except for us. Once again, I decided to go through the forest trails to get home. I turned into the trail and began riding down it, when out of nowhere I had heard a scream come from the pitch black darkness to my right. We both nearly shit ourselves, and I began to pedal incredibly hard for a while until we felt safe again. Reaching the end of the trail, I went to turn right into the final path, when all of a sudden, I had heard someone grunt behind me. We both turned around to see a guy dressed in all black laying down to the side of the path. It scared the shit out of me when I saw him, as being in all black, he completely blended into the darkness. I tried to pedal away, but I was just completely frozen in place. My eyes locked onto him. The man slowly got up, twisting and moaning like something from a horror movie. When fully standing, he looked to be over 6'2", with like a weird sharp and narrow neck and a huge head. He just looked super terrifying. We were both just sitting there in pure terror. He slowly put his finger up to his lips and began trying to undo his pants. He just looked freaking terrifying to me. When he got it out, I suddenly just snapped back into reality and just started pedaling and pedaling. But in my drunken state, I kept veering off the trail and into the bushes, eventually making both of us fall off. I looked behind me and I saw him full on sprinting at us. We both then darted in opposite directions and then ran into the forest. I remember that I kept tripping over the branches and sticks that were on the ground. I seriously thought I was gonna die. I just kept on running in pure adrenaline-filled terror, my legs feeling hollow beneath me. Eventually, I came to a stop and turned around, seeing nothing but pitch-black trees around me. The forest was absolutely silent, with the only sound being the wind rustling the trees. I hid behind a big rock and got on my phone to call Lizzie, where she told me to meet her at the main road. I slowly crept out from behind the rock, checking in all directions for the man, but he was nowhere. I just waited there for about a minute, trying to listen out for any sounds, but there was nothing. About 30 feet away, I had heard a twig snap, which just made me full on sprint again. I kept on running for about 5 minutes until I finally reached the main road, where I then found Izzy waiting at a bus stop. It turns out the guy ended up just chasing her for a full 5 minutes until she then reached the main road. She said that she stopped and turned around, watching him walk backwards back into the forest with his fingers still on his lips. We decided to walk home along the main road after that, finally reaching my house. We went back the next day to the woods during the daytime, and my bike was actually left untouched, still laying down in the bush. A couple of months later, my local town issued a news report of a flasher in the woods there, who had apparently flashed 3 other dog walkers on that very same trail. 2 years later, and we're still the best of friends, but let's just say that we never snuck out like that again. And to anyone listening to this, never ever put yourself in a vulnerable position, especially when drunk. I'll have some links to news articles to verify my story in the description. The story happened to my father in the early 90s. My family and I live in the northern part of Sweden, so excuse my English, as it isn't my native language. The story took place when my dad was young and lived briefly in America. Without further ado, here's the story. It was late at night when my dad was driving. I forget the reason, but it was quite a long drive on a deserted interstate surrounded by deep forests. In the fog behind him, suddenly he could make out a car that was following him. At first, he brushed it off, but then he realized that the car had its lights turned off. Why would someone drive in this foggy night without the lights on? He thought. He lowered his speed, waiting for the car to pass him, but it never did. It just slowed down and kept creeping behind him. My dad upped his speed again, and so did the car behind him. This was when he was sure that he was being followed. He kept going like this for another 10 minutes, getting more and more worried, when suddenly the car, still with their lights off, flirted past him and into the distance. My dad could barely make out the plates, but he saw that it was a black car with Russian plates. A little while later, my dad saw a man standing in the middle of the road, and as he approached the man, he saw that the black car was now parked a bit further into a forest up a small dirt path. My dad slowed down and cranked down his window just a little bit. The man then approached the window. He was dressed almost entirely in black, had a bald head, and was about medium height. He was probably in his late 30s, and he spoke in broken English. He said that his car broke down and he needed help, but this made no sense since his car wasn't at the side of the road, but like 20 feet into the forest. The man then repeated himself. My dad was too perplexed with the situation to answer, so he just said, "Sorry, I can't help you, sir," and then rolled up his window. Right after he did that, the man then screamed at him and started punching the glass. My dad then flirted the hell out of there, but when he looked in the mirror, he then saw 5 more men running up from the ditches. But the most disturbing part was that the men from the ditches were all wearing these creepy white masks with no facial features, just black holes for the eyes. My father drove for like 5 hours until he reached a fairly nice motel that he then checked into. In the middle of the night, he was woken up by scratching at his door like someone was dragging their nails across it. My dad was way too scared to move, but after a few minutes, it stopped. The next morning, he went out to his car, just to find that one of the masks the men had been wearing was laying on the hood of the car. He never saw any of them again, but to this day, he still hates to drive at night. This situation happened around 2011 when I was around 31 years old. My job was with a finance company where we managed customers' accounts and also collected payments from time to time in person. That was a really annoying part of the job, as they often put pressure on us to go outside of work hours unpaid to collect account payments in order to meet our monthly and quarterly targets. We never even saw the bonuses that we were promised we would get if we hit the targets. One day during work hours, I was assigned the task of collecting a payment, which meant driving around an hour away. This area had terrible traffic both ways, so it would have ended up a 4-hour trip. I arrived at my destination, but my client wasn't home. However, this was the time before I had a satellite GPS. I was using manual maps and was driving away slowly when I noticed it was school end time, so there were the children as normal walking to their homes. I noticed one young girl walking alone and a car creeping behind her just enough distance away for her to not notice. Something felt off with me. She was happily walking along in her own world with her school uniform, a little skirt on and a colorful backpack. I decided to stay where I was for a moment and watch what was going on. The little girl appeared to be around 8 to 10 years of age. I noticed the girl turn the corner, so I crept up slowly, watching the car following her. I then realized the car had a lone male inside, and he was intently watching this little girl. It really alarmed me. At the time, without thinking, I quickly pulled up alongside him with my phone right in his face. My car window was closed for my own personal safety. This will be relevant later. I showed the man my camera was on, and I pointed to both him and the girl, and then gestured that I was watching him and going to call the police. The car then quickly sped off. I pulled up to the girl and asked how close to home she was, and to be careful, and she quickly acknowledged me and continued off home. I watched until I saw her enter a garden on the same street, then satisfied she was home safe. Anyway, a day or so later, I was sent back at night when darkness had fallen to the same place to try and collect the payment, and once again, the customer wasn't home. Feeling deflated, I began to examine the road map as I was struggling to figure out how to get out of this housing estate using the flashlight on my phone when I heard a tap on my window. I looked up and there was a man standing outside of my driver's side window, and he then motioned for me to open the window. I nodded and put my key in the ignition to open the electric window when I paused. I looked back up and he was now pacing up and down outside my window, and it looked like he was scoping out the area. He again moved forward and knocked on my window, gesturing for me to open the window. I at this point gestured back as to say, "What do you want?" He shook his head and looked really irritated and angry at this point, and he tried to open my car door, but thankfully it was locked. But he then punched really hard at my window, which shocked me. I refused to let him think that I was afraid, even though I was shaking and frightened, but I calmly turned the key in the ignition and then slowly drove off, shaking my head at him. I can't be for sure, but I've always suspected that this was the same man that I confronted for following the young child, as I had never had any run-ins with customers. What if I was stupid enough to have opened my window or even forgotten to lock my car? I refused to travel alone at night so far away after this, despite the pressure the work continued to put on me. There are some really scary people out there, and males have no qualms about assaulting and attacking a female. Please be careful at all times. This is a 2-for-1 as one led to the other. It's pretty long, but I'll offer a brief backstory. I was 21 trying for a family with my ex, but I found out that he was cheating on me after my first miscarriage. I tried to move on, but we were living together until I had enough saved up to move out. It was easier said than done because I paid for everything. I went on a date trying to get my mind off of my ex, and I ended up being robbed. I met him on Facebook dating, and we decided to hang out after a few hours of talking. Yes, only hours. I gave him an area to meet up, and he showed up. I stupidly got in his car and we were driving to the beach when I then jokingly asked, "You're not going to rob me, are you?" He looked at me and smiled, assuring me that he wouldn't. Then he told me that he did have a gun though. I was just like, okay. Weird thing to say after that type of joke, but whatever. I told him a bit about me, and he told me some stuff about him, like that he was a felon, which makes it illegal for him to have a gun. This was news to me as it wasn't like he broadcasted that he was a felon, but I asked for his story. He lit his friend's car on fire because they had a fight. I was pretty much like, nah, this is where I call it. I texted my ex that I was in a car with a gun-toting felon and that I didn't feel safe. He asked if I could get him to pull up to the gas station my ex was working at so he could get a car description in case it wasn't a joke. I asked the guy to pull into the gas station saying I had to pee. And right before I got out, he asked me if I had remembered what I had asked him about him robbing me as a joke. I said yeah, and he was like, "Well, I lied." And he pulled his freaking gun on me. He demanded everything I had, and I thought he was joking, so I laughed it off. Note to everyone out there, if someone puts a gun in your face and tries to rob you and you don't have a bigger gun to draw, don't take it as a joke. I laughed it off until he snatched my phone from my hand, the dollar from my pocket, and he told me to get out or get shot. I got out, went inside, and I cried. I called the cops and gave them a description and then got a ride home from a really nice officer. The police believe that he robbed me at the gas station because he had bigger plans on what he wanted to do to me, and my decision to stop at the gas station may have saved my life. I asked why he thought that, and the cop broke it down for me. Why else would this guy decide to rob me at a lit up, very popular gas station? Why take that risk of being caught? Why take my busted up phone that was barely held together and leave me with the jewelry that I had on? The cop figured that the guy could have chosen a better target after meeting me if he just wanted money, and my choice to go to the gas station meant more people would see him with me, and if he had gone through with his plan to hurt me, it would be bigger news and a more serious crime, so he'd definitely be tracked down. A couple of days go by, and I realize I'm pregnant, and I have to tell my ex who's been taking it really easy on me as far as his angry outbursts due to him feeling bad about me being robbed. My ex was not happy. He put his hands on me for the first time in 6 years of knowing him. I knew then that I had to leave by any means necessary, but I had to buy a new phone and replace my inhaler that I left in the felon's car. I called up an old friend Jay to help me find a place to stay and to keep him up to date with what was happening. Jay found a Facebook listing and got in touch with the landlady on my behalf. We'll refer to her as S. I met her, and Jay and his family helped us come to an agreement on rent, rules, and expectations and the like. I moved in the very next day, paid my first month's rent, and started settling in. For the first 3 days, everything was normal, but the cracks started to show when S made weird comments like how I'd be with her forever, how my baby would be her granddaughter, how she'd help me raise her, and then we'd be one big happy family. And yes, she decided it was a girl before we even knew the gender. Weird, but I let it go because she was in her late 80s, and she had also outlived her entire family except for her second son who had gone missing in New Orleans just a few years ago and hadn't been seen or heard from since. I met the older man that was also renting a room, and we got on well enough for a few more days. Things took some getting used to. S was very clinky and controlling, but it's her house, and I didn't care as long as she gave me my space. Unfortunately, if you give someone an inch, they'll try to take a mile. She started coming up with a list of rules that I'd have to abide by to stay there. The rules included: no eating past 5 p.m., no coming home past 11 p.m., no walking my dog alone, no walking anywhere alone or without her permission, no closing my bedroom door, no inviting people over. If I buy any food at all, it must all be shared with her. I have to eat the dinner she cooks or not eat at all. I have to eat. I can't decide not to eat. I have to use the large bathroom. However, I couldn't use the large bathroom. I had to use the small bathroom in her room without entering her room, which was impossible. I chalked this up to the ramblings of an old lady and just agreed because it's just a month of this and I'll be gone. I called Jay and told him about the rules, and he was not as ready to let it slide. He called her to tell her that it wasn't what we agreed on, and that some of the rules were a bit confusing and stressful, and that the point of me staying there was to limit my stress while I saved up money. She agreed and she took out the bathroom rule, but the rest still stood. She came in the next day to ask how me and the older man felt about moving 2 more people in. We disagreed as it was a 3-bedroom house, and 2 rooms were already occupied with hers being untouched as she slept in her husband's hospital bed in the living room. Her own room was a shrine to her deceased family. Their pictures were on the walls, shelves, and bed, and wherever else a frame could fit. It was like a horror movie. She told us that we made a good point and she would just tell them no. She brought up another house meeting to let me know that I was way too close to my dog and Jay, and that there were obstacles in our relationship and bonding. She'd really like me to distance myself from them. I told Jay and we were like, weird, but only 3 more weeks to go. I came home one day to find my bed totally stripped and my stuff unpacked. The older man's room was also messed with. We confronted her and she gave her reasoning. Basically, I had to put my dog in the gated yard, but she didn't want him to mess up the grass by stepping on it. So she brought him inside for 9 hours while I was gone, and he had an accident on her hospital bed. She figured that he could have peed anywhere, so she would have to go into our closed rooms to check and ensure that there were no hidden puddles. She said that my dog was a bad dog and that she wanted him gone. I was livid, but I only had 2.5 weeks left, so I called Jay to arrange a time where he could come get my puppy and then watch him. His family loved my puppy anyway, so it wasn't too much. While I was at work, she had called Jay to come get my dog, and I never got to say goodbye. Once again, I was angry, and I called Jay to tear him a new one, only for him to tell me that she said that I didn't want the dog anymore. Confronting her again, she told me that it's better this way because the dog was coming between us and that she wouldn't let that happen, and that she also believed Jay was coming between us too. She then asked me to limit my contact with him as I was being a bad girl. Only 2-ish more weeks, so I sucked it up while putting away my money. By the way, the worst is yet to come. The next day, I was coming home from a 14-hour shift at the dollar store, and I was ready to shower and then sleep for my turnabout shift at 6 a.m. I opened the door and run straight into a 6-foot-tall, 350-pound lady towering over me. She introduced herself as Amy, and she told me that she had just moved in. Definitely was an oversharer, as she told me her entire life story and that she had stage 4 cancer. She said that she just needed a place until her at-home nurse could get her into a care facility. I was tired, annoyed, and riding through a wave of motion sickness, so I rushed my greeting, went to my room, got ready for my shower, and then I ran into another stranger, an old man named Pee-wee that had also just moved in. I was really confused on where S was putting them, but I didn't care as long as I could sleep soon. I was ready to slip into bed when the door opened, and then Amy told me that she thought I was in her room. Weird, because I could have sworn that I paid for this room. S came in and asked me to pack up all my things and move into the shrine room. I asked if I could do it the next day as I was really tired and was given a resounding no. I begrudgingly packed up all my things and moved to the shrine room, which came with a bunch of other rules. No sleeping on her husband's side of the bed. No putting my stuff anywhere in the room. No touching anything in the room. No using the bathroom that was in the room. No closing the door. No using the lamps. No moving the 2 folded flags on the bed. No sleeping in or under the sham because it was too expensive. No putting my blankets over the sham because the sham was expensive. I had to sleep on and in some sheets that she graciously offered me. Just a couple of more weeks was all I was chanting to myself. Unfortunately, the no using the bathroom rule did not apply to Amy, who was able to come in every 2 hours to spill the foulest smelling secretions a human being could ever make. The smells were unlike anything that I'd ever experienced. I don't want to be rude, but it truly smelled like she had stomach cancer. My little sleeping space was 2 feet away from the World War III enactment taking place almost every 2 hours. I was vomiting constantly. Amy moving in came with more rules like not making any noise, not taking pictures in the house, no music, and no knocking on any of the doors. Breaking these rules would cause a huge fit. She'd scream and throw things and accuse us of trying to make her cancer worse. The original man that was there before I moved in had enough of the circus taking place, and he moved out, so the older man took over his room. Things got even worse when the older man confessed his love for me and desire to be the man by my side as I raised my child. Amy S. and the older man were so clingy towards me. Amy considered me her sister who she'd be with forever. S. called me her daughter, and creepy man wanted to constantly touch and hover over me. I stuck it out until I was ready to move out, and I quickly packed my things and left under the cover of going to see my grandma. I never looked back, and it's been 2 years since. Last I heard, Amy is still bouncing from place to place. S has dementia, and the creepy guy is still not over the thought of me. I'm really not sure why. I was completely distant and not sympathetic to his affections. I ended up losing the baby shortly after moving into an apartment, but he continues to try and reach out to me. I'm now 23, engaged to be wed, and I have a 4-month-old that the creepy guy somehow found out about. He's called and texted, sent friend requests, messages, and voicemails, and continues to attempt to contact me. I guess I'll forever play a part in his mental circus. Moral of the story: stay away from Facebook. I was part of a small hunting club that has 300 acres in the mountains in Livermore, California, about 17 miles down Mines Road. Anyone who knows that area knows that anything can happen there, and not in a good way. No cell service, no electricity, and no running water. On the property was an old beat-up cabin with a handful of cots and a table. Nothing special, but it did the job if hunting for a night or more. I went there often, usually a couple of times a month, hunting boar, turkey, rabbit, you get the point. The lightning complex fire decimated the area along with the cabin. I still went out there often and simply just pitched a tent. After the fire, I noticed a lot of Hispanics were showing up on our property and the surrounding properties as well. I met a few of them and they were really friendly, but something about them creeped me out. They had a story of just purchasing property from up the road, and because they were nice, I let it be with them coming and going, and I told them no hunting on our property. Our property has an easement that leads to 2 other properties a few miles down a dirt road. Then I started hearing weird chirping sounds at night, and only at night, starting right when the sun went down. Finally, after so many times, I went looking for the chirping. Turns out the chirping was coming from numerous bushes. Once I got closer, it sounded more like a sonar or radar, like you hear on a submarine. Multiple beeping sounds. That scared me, and I thought maybe it was fish and game because many pot farms and meth labs were discovered during and after the fires. So I stayed away from the chirping. The next trip I made up there, after finding out where the noises were coming from, a storm came in out of nowhere. It was late, raining hard, and I was in my tent, and then shots rang out. Someone was firing a rifle. I then screamed, "Hey, I'm out here! Get off my property!" More shots rang out and my tent was hit. I darted out of my tent and ran down a hill. It was dark and raining, and I tripped and fell. I just laid there in pain. I even wet my pants. Finally, after a long wait, I made my way back up to my tent and car. I threw a few things into my car and then rushed out of there. My fiance was asleep when I got home. After that, I don't really remember that much. When she got home from work the next day, she found me naked in an empty bathtub, and I was crying, saying that I can't move my hand. I don't remember any of this. She then took me to the hospital and I was admitted for head trauma. I had a bad concussion, tore the nerves in my right hand, and I lost all function and movement. I had a herniated disc in my lower back and compressed a few discs in my neck, all from that fall running down that hill. So far, I've had 1 surgery on my back, 1 on my neck, and 1 on my hand and wrist. I went to the Alameda County Sheriff shortly after, and I found out those Hispanics were drug cartel members. I handed over my membership, and I never went back up there. That night was the scariest event of my life. I cannot think of anything else that has scared me that much. Being shot at and then running down a hill in the woods at night in the rain and falling. I was in so much pain and didn't know what to do except lay there, even pissing my pants. I have no idea how long I laid there. I might have lost consciousness. But laying there in the dark, soaked, raining, in the freezing cold was an experience I never want to relive. People talk tough. Yeah, if that was me, I would have grabbed my gun and just started shooting back. Saying crap like that. Now look, I'm ex-military, 25th Infantry. I'm good with guns, love the outdoors, and I've done a lot of hunting. But until you're put in that situation yourself, you have no idea how you'll react. Maybe I did the best thing by running. Maybe if I grabbed a gun and ran out of the tent firing back, I would have been shot and killed. Especially knowing now who they were. You don't hear good things about Mexican cartel members and what they do to people they don't like. I think the only way to make it out alive in a gunfight is to have lots of training with gunfighting, urban warfare, which is something I don't have. Your fight or flight is there for a reason. I didn't hesitate or think. I did what my body told me to do and I made it home alive. Banged up pretty badly, but I have one hell of a story to tell. So the story is about my ex-boyfriend. Let's call him Ian. It happened around the time when I was a senior in high school. I had plenty of boyfriends and girlfriends while I was in high school, but this one was a little different. So we met on Snapchat. I think he added me from the quick add feature. His name is Ian and he was on my Snapchat for a really long time. But I just ignored him usually because that's just what I did when it comes to people that I didn't really know that well on Snapchat. But one day he then responded to my story. I think it was just like a picture of me and like a stupid girly caption, and he then responded with, "Pretty girl." And of course, as a 17-year-old girl, I responded back with, "Oh my god, thanks," with a kissy emoji. And then we just got to talking. I saw that his snap maps were on and that he lived near me, so I kept talking to him. For about 3 days we were talking, and we then finally planned on meeting up. He was a car guy, so he wanted to show me where he works and whatever. I didn't have a license at the time, so he had planned to pick me up, but he had to meet my mom first because I was 17, and my mom didn't want me to go out with some random weirdo. Ironic, kind of. So the day comes and he gets here to pick me up, and my mom answers the door and tells him I'll be out in a second. She immediately runs to my room and tells me that she does not like his vibe, that something about him really creeped her out. I just thought that she was just worried about me, so I didn't really think too much about it. Anyway, we went out and he's telling me all of his childhood issues, and that shit was just really deep for the first date. So I was a little turned off by it, but he told me that he just overshares a lot, so I figured that was just his personality. A lot of weird red flags came up here and there, but I really thought he was normal. Fast forward to Thanksgiving. I had asked him his plans for Thanksgiving, and he told me that he didn't have any. His parents weren't really around much for him. He was raised pretty much by his grandparents. But anyway, we were talking about plans and he said something that was a little off-putting to me. He then said, "You're gonna let me come to your dinner though, right? I've seen the way your uncle looks at you. I don't want him thinking he can have his way with you." He's never even met my uncle. My uncle was not a good person, and he did some really bad things with minors, but nobody knew that except for me at the time. I never told Ian that. I responded with, "Okay, yeah, I'm sure my family won't mind, because how do you respond to something like that?" Fast forward after dinner, he spent the night at my place because he had just rebuilt his car, and it was already snowing where I lived at the time, and his car didn't have snow tires on it yet. I don't know how he even made it to my house, to be honest, but later that night he told me he loved me, which was really weird because we had only been dating for like 2 weeks at that point. Of course, as a 17-year-old girl, I said it back because it's a damn high school relationship. What else was I gonna do? For a while, he was normal. About 2 months in, he started to just show up at my house without letting me know he was going to come over or asking to come over. I lived with my best friend at the time because her family lived far away from the school we were going to, and she didn't want to switch, so we just figured it was easier if she just lived with me for the rest of our senior year. But anyway, one day my best friend and I were taking a nap after school, and I saw that there was a figure in my room. But I thought it was my brother, because sometimes he uses my charger if he forgot his at school or something, so I didn't really wake up. I just closed my eyes and drifted off back to sleep. I hear some noise a little while after, and I finally opened my eyes and saw Ian standing above me and my best friend while we were sleeping. I freaked the hell out and I asked him what he was doing and how he got in. He didn't say anything except, "I took a picture," and then proceeded to show me a picture of me and my best friend sleeping. I just kept asking how he got in, and he just kept dodging the question, so I let it go. He then told me he needed to shower, so I let him shower in my bathroom. While he was in the shower, my best friend started confiding in me about how uncomfortable he made her. I really should have listened to her. It was at that point that I realized he was really weird. But of course I didn't break up with him, even though my best friend was really uncomfortable with his presence. Fast forward 3 months into our relationship. I had the flu and he was supposed to come over and take care of me and just hang out for a little. While we were just chilling on my bed watching a movie, he got up and he told me he was going home. I then asked if something was wrong or if he wasn't feeling good, and he just said no, that he's going home. Then he went out to his car and then texted me that we should break up. No explanation or anything, just, I think we should break up. And I'm not the type to beg somebody to stay with me, so I just said okay. We hadn't blocked each other on anything, so he could still text me whenever, which brings us to this. I was hanging out with my friend Sarah when I randomly got a text from Ian asking me to come outside. I was confused as hell because why would he be outside my house? It's literally midnight at this point. I texted back saying, is something wrong? To which he then responded with, I need to show you something. I was really confused and honestly kind of concerned, so I went out to his car. He unlocked the door for me, and as I sat in the passenger seat and closed the door, he then immediately locked it. I thought that was weird, but I lived in a kind of sketchy neighborhood, so I brushed it off. We kind of just sat there in silence for a little, until I then asked, Hey, are you alright? As soon as I finished that sentence, he looked me right in the eye and then asked, Are you talking to someone new now? I wanted to be honest with him, and also, once again, I'd like to say I was 17, so I was a little bit of a hoe back then. Anyway, I then said, Yeah, just a couple of people. After I said that, his whole demeanor then changed. He looked almost enraged at what I had just said. He then punches his dashboard and then yells, You can't do that! I was really confused and freaking scared now. I tried to unlock the door and just get out of the car because I didn't want to deal with a tantrum from a man who broke up with me, but I couldn't get the damn thing to unlock. He noticed me struggling with the door lock and grabbed my hand from the lock and started squeezing it really hard. I begged him to let go and just kept saying, You're hurting me! You're hurting me! But he wouldn't budge. This part is all kind of a blur now, but I'm going to try to explain the best I can. Once he realizes that I literally can't go anywhere because he's restraining me, he reaches under the seat. He maintained eye contact with me while he's moving his hand around under the seat like he was looking for something. He then said, I'm going to kill you. At that moment, he then grabbed what he was looking for. It was a knife. I then screamed at the top of my lungs, and thank God I did, because there was a late night jogger running past my driveway, and he must have heard me yelling for help. I don't know how he heard me or even how he got there in time, but he started banging and pulling on the door, yelling, Let her out! Finally, Ian unlocked the car, and I ran inside so damn fast. I told my mom and my friend, and they called the police, but obviously he booked it the hell out of there, so the police never caught him. Moral of the story, do not date people that you meet off Snapchat. Hey everyone. That's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always